Welcome to the first of our online tender writing workshops. The workshop is actually based on something that we've been delivering for probably over 10 years now, which is a hands-on workshop along with a couple of masterclasses in how to write successful tenders. These have really helped over 300 clients to not only hone their skills, but to win more contracts and grow their business. This course content is a condensed version of the full day's training. The reason for that is a lot of the full day's training is based on the interaction with the learner or with the delegate. So it's really important as you read through this to see that we're not going to read everything on the slide, and we're not going to read everything that's in the notes. They're there as additional information for you. The aim here is to explain the process, an overview in this first part, and then really get you into the technical elements of successful tender writing. It really is the difference between winning and losing a tender. Our aim is to show you and help you develop the skills that are required. Good dynamic writing skills, excellence in document management, refining your process of gathering information about what you really do and not just what you think you do, and then being able to show this in a way that answers the questions the buyers have. Remember, tender writing is a competitive process. It's designed to open the field to as many competitors as possible. So the potential competition is massive. The aim of this course is to help you see that whilst you have an eye on the competition, writing well and constructing a tender well is always a key element to being successful. Then it's all about your product and your service in response to their request for a service provider who will meet their needs. Another element to this is that we do not cover pricing. Competitive pricing is something that can be addressed in the future, but really in this element what we're trying to focus on is actually getting the written work into a shape that can be used competitively. What you have to remember with pricing is that it is about understanding your own business, but it is very much about understanding the strategic objectives of the buyer. So what are we going to learn? Very quickly, in part 1 of the online tender writing course, we're going to learn the general overview of the process and the scoring methodology and just how to approach competitive tender writing successfully. The question here is, who really needs to set out tenders for people who want to supply them goods and services? The simple answer is any business that is looking to develop a relationship with a local authority or a publicly funded organization should expect to be required to complete a tender. What that means is there are specific rules about how public money is spent and the processes an organization should go through before they let a tender or a contract. In our case, we're governed by UK law that is subject to European law. That means we have to comply with legislation that was born in Europe but applies to UK contracts. In this case, we have a series of thresholds. So it's contracts that are above these values must be put out to tender. The government has also added additional provisions, and local authorities or public bodies have added their own provisions as well, their own rules. And it's always good to find out what they are. But as far as we're concerned, the public sector, when it hits a spending on a specific item that is above the threshold, they must put this out to tender. So for a small lot, a service that they know that they're going to be spending money on over a period of years, if it amounts to more than £65,631, they must put that out to tender. However, the government in the UK has said that it's appropriate to go to competitive tendering for £15,000 to £25,000, or to open up things called dynamic purchasing arrangements, which are frameworks for local businesses to compete for smaller amounts of money over a longer period. So it helps to know exactly who's required to put out to tender and where they're required to put that information. So as far as the UK is concerned, at this moment in time, we are still required to publish any contract opportunity that is over the threshold on Tenders Electronic Daily, which is part of the official journal of the European Union. However, in the future, it is more likely that everything will have to be published on Contracts Finder, which is found at on UK government websites. This really provides a level playing field for us all. It means that we know how much is being spent and how much we're bidding for, and how it's going to be spent over the period of time. But there are also some other advantages, as we see from looking at the process itself in the next two slides. Because tendering is a regulated process, we expect to find that everything conforms to the same standard when tenders are advertised. Therefore, when a buyer is looking for suppliers, they are required to complete an extensive process to provide an advert on the appropriate portal. Now in the UK, we expect to find those opportunities on Contracts Finder, the government website. European-wide, you can look on TED, which is Tenders Electronic Daily, which covers the whole of Europe. From the details that are provided by the buyer, we as the suppliers can do what is called an opportunity search. There are certain criteria that we can look for or that we've registered for, and by using that we can identify what we want to go for. Now, one of the key parts of this is that we are only then looking at relevant tenders. We're not getting lost in the thousands that are produced every day. We then register our interest. Now, every tender you would expect to be required to at least download the documentation as an expression of your interest in the opportunity. This gives them a chance to keep the statistics at the back end of the tender portal, showing that there are an adequate number of people bidding, that there were an appropriate number of people who wanted to bid or thought it would be of interest. What follows is the tender process. We complete all the documentation, we submit it by the deadline date, and on that date the portal closes. That means at the minute it says it's going to end, it cuts off. And from that point onwards, no one can add or take away from the portal itself. The buyer, on receipt of all of the tenders, can either do it as he runs along or as the deadline is closed, will send an acknowledgement of the receipt of your tender. This is to let you know that you're in the competition. Everyone has decided beforehand what the evaluation process will be, and that will be in all the documentation that you've already downloaded. So you know what they're going to be scoring, and that scoring is consistent across all competitors. An award of contract is made, but that's subject to a standstill period, which requires anyone who has objections or a reason for saying this isn't working, or you've failed to take into account X and Y, to raise an objection. However, whatever the outcome is, an announcement is made on the tender portal at the appropriate time. When we look at this, we're looking at the fact that the contract will run from the award date. So you may be awarded the contract and the start date will be a few months later, give you a lead-in time, but your relationship begins from the date of the award. You'll be subject to reviews. Those reviews may, where it's a public buyer, where it's a local authority, be subject to detailed scrutiny. Be ready for that and be ready to use that information to benefit your business for the next time that you have to tender for this contract. The process is set in stone. Any variations can be challenged, and knowing how to challenge them effectively is also an important part of understanding the tender process. The process is actually quite straightforward. A notice is produced and it appears either on Tenders Electronic Daily or, as in the future it's expected to be, on Contracts Finder. That notice has generated an advert to all businesses that want to compete, and therefore you have the opportunity to actually register and look on line at all the details. Based on the information you're provided, then you express an interest. This often leads you to more documentation that you're now able to download in full, and it's worth downloading everything plus any additional information you can find about the buyer and their processes. Read all the documents, make sure you've read them thoroughly and you understand them. Where you don't understand something, highlight it, put a question mark by it. Where it requires action, highlight it, put an asterisk by it, so that you know that you've got questions here and action points here. Gather the information, decide on how it's going to be written. You know the deadline, so complete the tender to the deadline by all means, but give yourself space to edit, update and polish your tender before you submit it. Then make sure that you submit that tender on time. That's not a minute afterwards. It's not a second afterwards. You must have completed it by the deadline. For example, if a tender has to be in by 12 noon on a specific date and your submission is finished at 12:001, it's late and it won't be opened. The actual portal will be locked at that time. If you're in the process, literally in the motions of doing it, it will take what you've uploaded to that point and work with that. You'll be sent a receipt from the portal to say that your document has been properly uploaded, and that is not an acknowledgement that the document is accurate. That is just that they have received it. So as you can see, very straightforward process running through. The middle parts of it are all about you as the tender writer. It's topped and tailed by the buyer and the production of a notification of opportunity and then a receipt that you have submitted a tender and that you've done it on time. As soon as that is complete, you're into the evaluation stage of the tender process. The tender notice is all you really require to make that decision as to whether or not you're going to bid or not bid. All the information that you require is basically there. The duration of the contract, its value, who the buyer is, and how they plan to work with this contract. They'll also set out some of the key criteria, and they'll also explain what the evaluation process is. So the overall documentation is there, and it's available through Contracts Finder, the government website. And it's really worth registering with Contracts Finder, sorting out your categories, and getting a list of opportunities that come up in your sector. However, to actually get all the detail that you require, Contracts Finder will list the portal that is being used or the buyer access point. And what this means is you need to be registered with the portal providers. And what they will do is they will represent the buyer. A single point where all their tenders are shown and where you can register an interest in the ones that you specifically want to go for. So the portal sorts them all out, separates them into their respective categories, and then notifies you of the end date and key details like the theme or the number of the contract. Based on your registration, you'll get an email notification of the categories that you want or the buyers you're specifically interested in the area that you're focused on. If you don't do that, you're going to have a real problem, because you'll be inundated with every single tender opportunity, and that you only need to go to Tenders Electronic daily and look at the thousands of tender opportunities that are put on there every day, and you soon see that you're literally going to be overwhelmed. So using the tender notice and locating it in the right place. So if you want to do business with the East Midlands purchasing authorities, you would go to a Due North Pro Contract website, portal. Other portals cover other areas, and to do that they require you to let them know what you're specifically interested in. Once you've got that, you can then download all the information that you require, because you can express the interest, all the documents become available, you download them, and then you can opt in or out of the procurement arrangement. So you haven't committed yourself. You get to look at the documents and you get to see exactly what's required. Now, there are two forms of response, either questions online, question sets, which are really simple to go through, but it does require some level of discipline, and then the questionnaire that you download and complete on your own PC, which often gives you more opportunity to add supporting information. So the key thing with the tender notice is that it is open to everyone, but you don't have to see every single tender that's produced every day. You can sort it through the portal providers so that you only get the ones that are of interest to you and that will benefit your business. Opportunity qualification is a critical point. It's the decision to bid or not to bid. And when you make this decision as a tender writer, you are looking specifically at how you fit the overall bid profile. Now, for many, this is a very complex calculation. For others, it's very simple. We bid for everything. We have a go at everything. Now, whilst having a go at everything may seem to be the most viable approach for a business, it isn't necessarily the best use of time. There are certain technical and qualification criteria that really will shrink the number of opportunities you have. As soon as you know that the bid is heavily competitive and you know where you fit within your competitor analysis, you can really answer these questions honestly. It's a time for honest reflection as we look at how we're going to compete. It's not a point to say, actually, let's give up and let's not bother. It's the point where we say, is this worth the time and the effort to come third or fourth or fifth? If it's a dynamic purchasing system, the answer is yes. But if it's a straight competition, coming fifth is not really very helpful at all. You put a lot of effort in, but if you know you don't stand a chance of winning it, discretion is really the best step. So how do we evaluate? Well, there are lots of ways, but the simple task is, where you possibly can, look at the current holder of the contract. Investigate them to start with, and just look at how they're structured, what sort of organization they are, and what level of turnover they have, and how much of the local market they control. From that, you actually get to give yourself a framework of how you'll compete. David beat Goliath not by wearing the same size armor or approaching him with a long sword. Rather, he took what he was good at and competed with that. So immediately you can see, by understanding who your competitors are, their vulnerabilities and your strengths. There are sections within the questionnaire that will always give you, and the specification, the essential criteria. And within that, what they are designed to do is structure the questionnaire in a way that establishes your eligibility, your financial capacity to meet the rigors of long-term contracting, and also your sustainability. They may ask for a business continuity plan. Now, the business continuity plan isn't a demonstration that you're thinking everything will fold, but it's that you've thought about how to deal with hiatus or gaps in service at critical times. Also, because the public sector is regulated in a specific way, they are legally accountable for the way their supply chain behaves, and therefore they will check your legal compliance on the environment, on health and safety, on directors' duties, on your finances. They will want you to demonstrate to them that you meet their criteria. This is always a pass and fail section. So if you fail on one point, it could be that you fail everything. Be honest and upfront, because there are compliance officers who will look at bids as part of the due diligence process, and they will check certain parts of the information you provide. So be sure to be accurate all the way through. And then they will set thresholds for technical or business capacity. They'll set deadlines that you, as the provider, the supplier, will need to demonstrate that you can hit. If you have any doubts, or if you think that there may be a real strain on your business, that's the time to pause before making the decision to bid. Because once you've made the decision to bid and you've submitted it, you've committed the funding that the spending that you've made linked to this. So remember, the essential qualification process is something to take into account every time you look at a tender opportunity. Scoring is probably the most complex element of the process as we come across it. The reason for that is because when it's explained, it seems absolutely obvious that this is the right way to establish who is the best out of all the tendering bodies, all the suppliers. However, due to the fact that people do not fully understand how the scoring is done, they fail to demonstrate that their organization, their business, is best placed to deliver the services that the buyer is looking for. This does present a problem. Therefore, a scoring methodology is generally produced somewhere in the documentation that you receive. We've used a simple one here to actually explain just exactly what the buyer is looking for, what they're going to score you on. Now, it is not unusual for organizations and businesses to score 0. On a scale of 0 to 10, what that really means is you haven't answered the question. You haven't even looked at what the supplier needs to provide for the buyer. For example, one of my clients many years ago failed to score in 4 questions related to their business, which was in the construction industry. What happened was they read the answer, or they read the question, and their answer was yes. The question was, can you demonstrate your experience in constructing, it was just a steel frame building? And the person answered yes. That actually wasn't what was required for that question. Now, admittedly, the question was badly worded. We're coming across that less frequently these days, but it did highlight the approach many people had, which was yes and no, answer the question that's there without reading all the documentation, because the documentation explained that they required evidence to support the answer of yes. Poor, scoring 1 or 2 in answering a question, generally displays a measure of inexperience or laziness when it comes to promoting your business and really understanding what you can deliver for your clients, for your customers, for the public sector. And it's really a demonstration that you don't understand the marketplace. And yet, most of us can get beyond that. Our problem is that 3 to 6 is the average score. We provide a little bit of evidence. We're not fully sure about how we demonstrate that, what our technical ability needs to be, what project size they're talking about, or what service framework they're looking for. Now, immediately there is an element of doubt in our writing style. It allows the buyer to think, I'm reading something here where the person isn't confident that they're going to deliver what I require. So it's time to reflect and think carefully that 0 to 6 is never acceptable. So in our own appraisal of our bid, as we write it for that final draft version, we need somebody to go in there and see that we're hitting 7 to 10 every time. We need to demonstrate that we have clear evidence, that we have the experience, that we can show in specific instances what we would do and how we would respond, even having case studies, photographs, anything that demonstrates our technical ability and our capacity to deliver. Currently, for many contracts in the care sector, local authorities are asking you to prove that you have the access to staff for fluctuations in demand, because over the winter months, demand spikes for care, particularly those coming out of hospital. They need to unblock the beds. Now, the argument that I've come across many times as to why these contracts aren't being fulfilled by the private sector is that there isn't enough evidence that they are doing this or have the capacity to meet the demand. There isn't the level of trained staff available to them. So having a clear recruitment policy is good. Having an explanation of your 0 hours contracts may be perfect to get you 7 or 8, but 9 or 10 is scored when you say, last Christmas we had 10 people who were discharged from hospital and we were able to respond with X and Y support on this date within so many hours, and all 10 were returned to their homes and discharged from hospital with adequate care, and our staff were on site and ready to help them from the minute the discharge happened. Now, as many evidences based around that, as many experiences of individuals, and then record how they feel, and you're hitting 9 and 10. And if you can get even more specific with the responses by identifying the buyer's own organization in the process, that whoever was involved at their end expressed satisfaction with the way you responded, you're going to score highly again. So think carefully as you look at the scoring methodology wherever it appears, and look at what you think is an acceptable level of scoring. Now, for me, I write a lot of bids and tenders for new organizations, new startup businesses, and I aim for them to help me score between 7 and 9 every time. The reason for that is if the business owners believe that they have something to sell to the public sector, there must be evidence either of their own experience or the people that they've employed working in this area and their capacity to deliver the technical skill and ability that's required to hit the service targets. It's not an unclear pathway. It really requires some simple decisions made at an early stage in the tender writing process. So we get the scoring methodology at the same time we get the questionnaire. We can sort out from that point how we're going to answer the questions to deliver 7 to 10 rather than 0 to 6. What can we expect from the questionnaire then? We know how it's going to be scored, but what is actually going to be involved in creating the response? So looking at the questionnaire, we know what is in there. There is a standard format that really provides us with good direction on how we should prepare ourselves for answering this. It breaks down basically into 4 parts. Although there may be many sections in the questionnaire you're actually completing, you'll find that they fall into 4 categories. The first one is the mandatory information. The buyer must understand what sort of economic unit you are as far as the bid is concerned, whether you're a sole trader, a limited company, or partnership, or any other form of business. So it's critical to have to hand, when you start the process of completing the form, all your company information, your date of registration, where you were registered, the registration number, your DUNS number, which is available through Dun & Bradstreet. All limited companies have them. Anything that is requested in that first section is standard, publicly available information, but they want you to put it in for them. From there, there are simple things that they'll look for with regard to legal compliance in your company's structure. So have you completed all the information that is required? This is really an area where a lot of small businesses particularly struggle, because policy and procedure, having it there on the books, does not make you compliant. And the fact that you haven't been assessed by another organisation, a body like the Health and Safety Executive or the Care Quality Commission or Ofsted, you will struggle if you don't understand that it's more than just having policies and procedures. So compliance is the process of demonstrating that you understand what you're legally required to do and you have completed it. Declarations, whilst the form of tender may be at the start and the contact details will be in this part as well, the declarations are really a series of statements that show that you are fully committed to the tender that you're putting in. Countries around Europe may require that you have specific accreditation for the work you take on. For example, if you want to work in the education sector in this country, you'll need a registration number, and you'll be expected to provide that. It's a form of formal listing or accreditation for that purpose. But what about Care Quality Commission? You're required to register and achieve specific standards before you can offer services through certain contracts. That's another form of accreditation. There are other things that they can ask for accreditation that you're expected to be able to supply. Additionally, technical capacity can be included in this bit, and this could be a breakdown of your staff, your recruitment policies and processes, details about the key personnel within the organization. The aim of this is really to give them a flavor very quickly of the fact that you, as an organization, as a supplier, are a serious provider that they can look at. If you fail to complete any of the boxes that are provided here, it gives the buyer the discretionary option to actually exclude you. If the information is incorrect, it can also be detrimental to your bid. Even though they say it's not scored, it's still reviewed. Compliance officers will go through specific things, and before a contract is entered into, if the accreditation and technical capacity doesn't meet the specification, it won't be going any further. So that really helps us understand that that initial part that we just scroll down can actually have a number of pitfalls. So it's really worth taking the time to think about these things, have all the documents in the right place and available to you, and ensure that you put the right information in the right box. The grounds for exclusion is a section in its own right with two parts: discretionary and mandatory grounds for exclusion. So if you, and these are pass fail. So on the mandatory, if you fail to answer the question appropriately, they will exclude you. Where it's discretionary, they obviously have the chance, or give you the chance, to qualify those grounds for exclusion. What have you done about it? Have you been using self-cleaning techniques that enable you to demonstrate that as a business you've moved on from the issues you've had? Now, there are always sections of the documentation that are provided that list all the discretionary and the mandatory grounds for exclusion. You'll find that some are targeted specifically at the company. The company is viewed as an individual. Now, if you're a sole trader, that's fine. If you're a partnership without limited liability, you're answering this as individuals. However, if you're a company, you're answering it initially collectively, and then secondly as an individual director. Now, in those cases, don't take it for granted that the directors have never been involved in any of the points that come up for discussion. Quite often, working with small businesses or medium-sized businesses, we come across people who a few years ago were linked to a bankrupt company or an insolvent company, and they were directors or members of the senior management team at the time, and they haven't passed that information on. They haven't shared that information. With a search of directors and who they've been involved with, the companies they've been involved with, it's very quickly evident that these people need to declare the fact that they were involved and what steps were taken, that the directors weren't found to be responsible for the failure of the company, or the company was wound up for specific reasons, but the company's house or the revenue, inland revenue, have not decided you are an excluded director. All these things need to be noted, but also anyone involved in the decision-making process comes into this as well. So the management team need to be reviewed from time to time, particularly those who are going to be involved in actually delivering the contract. Those decision makers involved, their standing is critical to the management and long-term retention of the contract. So the way to view this is, think of it in terms of, you might have 10 questionnaires a year, but you don't want to ask all these questions each time the questionnaire comes up, each time the tender opportunity comes up. So at a meeting of directors or a board meeting in some sort, ask the directors to personally review the information, and also the senior members of the board to review, the chair and what have you, and just sign a declaration that says none of these things apply. And also have a caveat on the bottom that the individual directors would need to inform the chairman of the board or the managing director if something in that list changed. The other thing to be aware of at this point is conflicts of interest are not generally put within the grounds for exclusion, but it's a really good time to find out from everyone whether there is a conflict of interest, whether there could be a conflict of interest. One of the ones that is quite common is a statement that nobody is involved with the local authority. Well, when I had a number of people working for me, I had no idea who their family worked for. I had no interest in that. I employed them to do the job, not to get involved with their families. So conflicts of interest need to be reasonable, but it's really good to ensure that you have all that information concerning your directors and your senior management team, and that they know what you mean by that, and so you cover the same things at the same time. So that's just a tip. When you're dealing with the grounds for exclusion, do the company and the individual directors, and at the same time tackle the conflicts of interest. For many of my clients, this is the bit that scares them the most, because it often comes across as very intrusive, and it also seems to make them feel as though they're going to expose weaknesses, when in truth it's nothing of the sort. This is designed to actually set your company against the benchmark that the buyer has already set. So when they look at you in this technical information part, which could include a lot of information, health and safety, environmental issues, policies, procedures, how you deal with things when dealing with other organizations, these elements are really the technical bits. Now, let's just take financial status. If you don't have 2 years accounts prepared and declared, then you need to have additional information. Management accounts work, but what works even better is your current management accounts with your future cash flow. Your current management accounts will show how you're performing against your own standards and what you expected to be doing at this time, and that will tell them whether or not you're good at managing what you do and you've got a realistic view. And then the cash flow will show exactly what you expect from the following year. Now, some accountants or finance teams are able to cash flow project with the funding that's been received, the contract monies that's going to be received, and without. Others are going to use what's called a status quo model, which is just basically, if we carry on this way, we'll be improving our overall performance by a certain percentage month on month. Both are fine. What it helps the buyer to do is establish that you have good financial control, that you have a good technical control and awareness of your company. So don't be afraid of it. Actually use it to test yourself as a company. The other parts are about how you're going to bid, your competence to bid. And the bidding model is really important. If you're going to use subcontractors, you have to declare that. If you haven't identified who those subcontractors are, put the process in for attracting the subcontractor. Let the buyer know that you have a professional approach to working with other people. Also, within this, they'll want to know a little bit about your management style, how you employ people, how long people work for you. So you might get questions within this about staff turnover, rates of attrition in employment, and you may also get information requests for the qualifications of individuals who are going to be involved in the project. You still haven't got to the key part of the bid, which is answering the specific questions around the tender opportunity. This is looking at your competence, your technical ability, your capacity and capability to deliver the contract that they're after. Now, if you've delivered other contracts or are delivering contracts now, they'll ask for references. Please remember to ask your referees before you name them. A short anecdote for you. One of the people that sent us a tender many years ago, lovely tender, all read really well. In fact, they were in the top 3. So we sent off the request for a reference to the 3 names listed. Now, none of them knew that they'd been stated as a referee. 2 of them came back with that they would prefer not to be referees for this company because they couldn't say anything nice. The 3rd one came back with what basically was, this is the worst company we've ever worked with. They never achieve their deadlines. They never achieve the standard, and the quality is so poor. The only reason we buy from them is because there are no other suppliers in our area and we need the product. Now, knowing what your referees are going to say is so important. So develop a relationship with them. Don't get into the habit of just naming the same 3. Look at the opportunities you have to show quite a wide client base. If you haven't got a client base, then demonstrate your experience. If that's the senior staff, fantastic. Another anecdote, a construction company that was asked to build a spread of dams didn't have any way of providing evidence in their own view. Now, when we broke it down, they had never built a series of dams in that way. However, 2 of their technical staff had been involved in similar and much larger projects, and they were going to be involved, in fact take a direct role in this project? The answer was simple. Use that and explain that is why you recruited them for projects like this that require that level of technical expertise. They won the contract, but when they first saw it, they had no idea that they could complete it. Then we get to technical compliance. Technical compliance is just that you have all the right paperwork in the right place and that you're going to send the right forms into them. So you need to make sure that you've got your documentation listed and that it works so that they can draw it down. So getting actually all your links right or all your naming and numbering systems right is so important. The declarations. Now these are the end of the document.